BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, should processed meat be allowed in pig and poultry feed? Let's start today, though, with rural community champions, the unsung heroes who are making a real difference in their villages and towns. These are the people we'll be talking about all this week. And today's champion, 86-year-old Fran Barker, can be found in one of the remoter parts of Wales. She lives in the coastal village of Solva in Pembrokeshire, where she's joined a handful of other villages to set up and run a unique support system, looking after the most vulnerable people in the village. Sarah Moore has been to meet her.
Solva, a small fishing village on the St David's Peninsula in the most western part of Wales, with its own harbour and beach, very popular with holidaymakers and retired people. Fran Barker is a retired information scientist, now 86.
This way. Oh my gosh, your view.
10 years ago, she was a significant founding member of a now large group of residents who call themselves Solva Care.
It was really for domiciliary care. If we could get a group of carers that were domiciled in Solva, most people thought it would be a very good idea. It metamorphosed into a volunteer scheme just to help people in the village with whatever they needed help with.
So Fran is a rural community champion, but she doesn't act alone. Currently, there are 9 Solva Care trustees and 1 paid coordinator who organises the 40 village volunteers. Due to strict regulations, they're not allowed to do things like administer medication, but there's so much they can do.
They sound very trivial, but dog walking is huge. The dog walker is seeing that person often every day, and they can keep their pet, and it's a really important thing. The second one is local transportation, just getting somebody from the house to the hall or to the football club hub or to a concert or whatever it is they want to do, and to hospital, all the appointments, to get to the surgery, to get to collecting prescriptions, shopping, you name it. And of course, at the other end of the scale, we can pick up a real emergency.
They're now a registered charity. On top of receiving donations, they do have to keep reapplying for funding. Short-term grants provided by the likes of the Sustainable Development Fund and the Big Lottery.
We really don't need a huge amount of money. We do need to pay the coordinator. We do need to pay the person who deals with the finances. Our real problem with the funding is that you can get funds relatively easily for some completely new idea, but when it's something that's been ongoing, they say, we can't find something that is not new anymore.
So you're going to take me to meet a gentleman in the village who uses the service?
Yes. Tony, he used to be a very active man. He could mend things and build things, and he's a gardener, and he had a dog, but he's nearly blind, and he walks with 2 sticks. This is Sarah.
Hello. Lovely to meet you.
Hello.
Thank you so much for letting us come and see you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Coming in. With my loss of sight, I find the community absolutely brilliant. I'm restricted as to what I can do. I'd just be housebound. There's the luncheon club, the coffee morning, and then the Friday club. If I'm stuck in the house, I get quite despondent. To get out and meet and talk with other people, which I'm able to, it makes life a lot more pleasant.
Fran's own role has involved being a trustee, a driving and walking volunteer, a fundraiser and event organiser. And as well as Solva residents enjoying regular events like Ukulele Pirates and Judy's Mindful Moments, Fran runs a very specific element of the Friday Club.
I ended up doing a session on poetry, and it's very popular. Now they've written sonnets, they've written limericks, they've written haiku.
A lovely lady named Janet knitted socks for the whole of the planet. She knitted so many, didn't charge not a penny. Although she's now broke, she still knits the socks, and I'm sure she'll be knitting when she lies in a box.
Brilliant.
Solva Cares and Fran Barker there, and we will be meeting more remarkable rural community champions all week. Gangs of hare coursers have caused thousands of pounds worth of damage to farmland and infrastructure after about 25 4x4 vehicles swept through fields in Cambridgeshire in a single weekend. Cambridgeshire police have made several arrests and seized multiple vehicles as well as hare coursing equipment. Matthew Latter, who farms 2,000 acres in the Cambridgeshire Fens, is one of those affected. He showed BBC Look East's Alex Dunlop some of the damage.
Parts of car that have been broken off as they've driven at high speed across the field.
So they abandoned some cars here, did they?
Yes, we were left with 4 vehicles on the farm, 2 dumped in a field, 1 stuck in a field and another one burnt out.
Matthew's farm was one of several targeted by hare coursers across Cambridgeshire and into Hertfordshire. About 25 speeding cars, reportedly driven by men in balaclavas, swept through Mainey and surrounding villages. Matthew counted up to 70 people breaking into his farm. 5 gates were destroyed.
You can see here they've actually cut the gates.
They've just sawn through them.
Sawn straight through the gates, so these gates will have to be replaced now.
A second line of defence, concrete bollards, were just dragged out of the way.
I witnessed cars driving like maniacs all over my farm, chasing deer, killing hares with dogs. My youngest daughter, she's 7, she was terrified, she was crying. None of us wanted to leave the house, so we kind of felt barricaded in our own house, really, on our own farm, which is just totally unacceptable.
But what's angered people most locally was the police response, or lack of it.
You have failed this community. Thank you.
At a public meeting in Mainey, 300 confronted Cambridgeshire's Chief Constable. Nick Dean apologised for what he said was a failure by his force to deal with the incident.
So how many vehicles do you think came through here?
Well, it looks to be at least half a dozen, 8 maybe.
For more than 3 hours, the gang drove through Matthew's crops. 3 times he called the police. No one came.
We needed the police, they weren't here. Just how bad does it have to get before we get a response on the ground? Apologies are one thing, but action is another. We need to see something change. This can't go on. Absolute lawless driving around, taking over people's farms, threatening local people. It's just not acceptable.
Matthew Latter there. Well, in a statement, the police said, due to the scale of the incident and the multiple locations where offences took place, as well as a significantly demanding weekend elsewhere in the county, we didn't have the resources available to deal with every report we received from members of the public. Tractors are again expected in central London today as farmers continue to protest over the government's plan to reintroduce inheritance tax on farms from next year. Today's rally will coincide with a parliamentary debate on how the tax will impact tenant farmers. As we've reported, the government says imposing the tax on farms worth more than £1 million at 20%, half the usual rate, is fair and will raise much-needed public funds. Farmers argue the move could see family farms put out of business. Now, should meat be allowed in some animal feed? Well, that's the question being asked in a new consultation in England and Wales. A similar consultation has already been held in Scotland. Measures brought in to control BSE banned feeding animal protein to farmed animals, but the government says those rules no longer reflect the scientific evidence. It's proposing that pigs be allowed processed poultry meat in their feed and poultry be allowed processed pig meat in theirs. Allowing processed animal protein, known as PAP, in feed would bring us into line with the EU. Professor Michael Lee, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Harper Adams University and an advisor to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organisation, says PAP makes a lot of sense.
Processed animal protein is really another name for meat and bone meal. Meat and bone meal used to be a regular ingredient in animal feeds, but post-BSE, meat and bone meal has been removed and replaced with other proteins, particularly soya.
As you say, feeding livestock with animal proteins was banned for a reason. What's changed that means it's being considered?
Numerous things have changed. First of all, removing those higher risk materials, particularly associated with the spinal cord and the brain material, where that prion resides. And also an understanding of how that prion is deactivated during the rendering process. And that's specifically a combination of heat and pressure. So to ensure that there is no risk associated with PAP or processed animal protein.
So how does it compare then on both price and sustainability with, for instance, soya?
Well, PAP is a byproduct. The abattoir industries in Europe produce about 13.5 million tonnes of byproduct animal protein. It's produced anyway, and therefore comes without the land use of soya. Also, we're talking here predominantly about feeding omnivorous livestock, pigs and poultry. Their gut is used to dealing with the amino acids and the nutrients from animal source foods.
What happens to it all at the moment then?
Meat and bone meal is used in other industries, so it can be used to produce fertiliser, it can be used for energy, and of course, it's used in pet food. So I'm not saying for us all that it's completely free, because other markets have come in to utilise a very valuable resource.
Although it might turn out to be a bit expensive for some farmers.
We obviously, when a resource is removed from a market, other markets come in. But also there's huge costs associated, of course, with importing soya, both in terms of financially and environmentally.
This consultation is looking at various different things, insects for a start. How excited are you about that?
Yeah, I think insect protein certainly will play a role in sustainable livestock diets. The great thing about insects, of course, is they can use a whole load of waste streams and produce very high quality protein. And I think it's particularly exciting for the poultry industry. Gallus domesticus, our chicken, was evolved to consume insect protein, not soya.
This consultation also talks about using ruminant collagen and gelatin in non-ruminant feed. So that's stuff from cows and sheep, which will alert alarm bells in some people. Is that safe?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, we understand about the pressures of feeding a herbivorous livestock, an omnivorous diet. I think we should preclude that, of course, from ethical grounds. But the potential of ruminant perhaps to be fed to pigs and poultry, we should certainly consider, because they are omnivorous livestock.
Professor Michael Lee. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Heather Simons, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production. Now over to the BBC Weather Centre for the Farming Today 5-day forecast.